Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
Inside the training room. How you doing this morning, Austin?
A little sad about the T-Wolves, but, I'll get over it.
Yeah, got to be down, but you got to be excited for the future, though, too, right? With Anthony Edwards, I think, he's just going to continue to get better, right?
Yeah, he obviously had a little bit of struggles against the Mavs, but, what he did is at 22 years old, the future's bright. I think we have a lot of pieces. So, at the beginning of the season, if you had told me we would have made it to the Western Conference Finals, I would have taken it in a heartbeat. So, you can't be too sad, but, after we beat the Nuggets, I thought we might have had a little mojo going, and it just wasn't enough. That Luka is just, unreal.
Yeah, man. Do you think Cat? Do you want him around and Rudy Gobert? Do you think you need some more pieces around Edwards?
I do think they need to be different. Honestly, it's hard to say. I thought we, for whatever reason, ran the offense through Rudy too much in the first half last night. I have no idea why we kept dumping into him. He's a defensive powerhouse, but on the offensive end, not so much. But Cat's streaky. When he's hot, he's elite. When he's not, he's a liability, and on the defensive end. So I think that there's going to have to be a couple of changes, but I don't think we're that far away from an elite team. I think we overachieved a little bit this year, but I think we have pieces to be solid for the foreseeable future.
I agree, man. I agree. Hey, I know this was a couple of weeks ago, but I want to bring it up and get your thoughts. So I texted it to you a couple weeks ago. Again, David Bakhtiari, but this was a report that said that Dr. Brian Cole proclaimed him on schedule for a 2024 season return. This is from Ian Rappaport. Cole said, Cole is the chairman of orthopedics at Rush University Medical Center in Chicago and chairman of surgery at Oak Park Hospital. So for us who don't know who Dr. Brian Cole is, how big of an endorsement is this for David Bakhtiari to get that endorsement from him?
He's up there. There's probably three or four biggest names in sports medicine. James Andrews is historically been probably the top one, but Brian Cole is a close second probably. Neil Elatrash out in L.A. There's a handful of names that just every single orthopedic surgeon knows who they are, and he's one of them. Rush is a fantastic program out of Chicago. To hear him say that certainly holds a lot of weight. I'm sure he did it off a combination of physical exam, patient complaints, and MRI, and that's all great. Don't get me wrong. Obviously, the real question is how does that knee handle the stress of a football season? But you can't get any better than someone saying it looks great and he's on pace. So certainly, hopefully that's true, and he's going to get back and be able to compete. But those kind of cartilage procedures, and we had talked about his a couple times in the past, but he had that Macy procedure where they basically harvest some cartilage, grow it, and then replant it back in. It can work very well, and when it works, it can be great. Not all cartilage procedures take, unfortunately, so it's a challenge, and that's one of the biggest challenges we face as orthopedic surgeons is patients with cartilage injuries. And so it's good to see that he's going in the right direction. Time will tell, but again, that's certainly great news.
Mm-hmm. Staying with the Packers here for a couple, Eric Stokes and Christian Watson, who we had heard a while back that they were going to visit some specialists at University of Wisconsin, and we got to hear from Watson and Stokes exactly what they found out. And for Stokes, he said he was told that his foot, remember he had that foot injury a couple of years ago, he said his foot wasn't strong enough, and so his hamstring and calf was putting extra pressure on there. And then Watson, he said his leg strength, the symmetry was off, where one leg was stronger than the other. I guess my question is that, do you think because there was an overusage on one side when they were maybe recovering from an injury on the other side of the legs?
It's certainly possible. We see that. There's always compensatory things that happen. So whether it's an opposite or contralateral injury or something in the same limb where it just forces stress, we compensate, right? So if you have a sore, fill in the blank, ankle, knee, whatever, it's not like you just stop doing it, right? You limp, you walk funny. Really what that is you're shifting weight to other parts of your body. That's all that it is. Our body's saying, I'm going to do this whether it hurts or not, and your body compensates. And so that's obvious, right? You see someone limping, you can see from a mile away something's wrong. It doesn't always have to be so glaringly obvious. And when you're talking about an elite athlete trying to sprint or jump and they're putting extreme forces across their body, those subtle kind of compensatory mechanisms can result in injury. So I mean, can you tie it to that 100%? I don't think so. It's certainly multifactorial, but to see that and address it should hopefully decrease the risk of injury in the future.
Is this something new? It's the University of Wisconsin's School of Medicine and Public Health that they showed. Or if you've heard of tests like this, where like I'm reading a little bit about Watson, where it says test showed a muscle imbalance in his legs, and then they got it down to the percentage where one was 20% more than 20% strength more than the other one, and they're trying to get it to about 6% symmetry. Is this kind of a newer thing, or has this been around for a while?
No, that kind of biodex testing or strength testing, we've been doing that for a long time. And there is, even though it sounds very, very objective, right, it's giving us an exact number, there's still some subjectivity to it. So it's not like you can just put that in the bank as a fact, but it definitely gives us nice clues. So, it's been used historically. One of the big initial pushes was in rehab for ACLs, where there kind of used to be these studies that said you need to be at least 85 or 90% of your contralateral leg to return to play from an ACL. The studies bore out that wasn't necessarily completely accurate, but it is definitely a good test for us to say, all right, are you getting back to where you were prior to injury? And then, of course, you can use it for other things like this, where it's like, is there another muscle imbalance occurring in the hips, knees, wherever it may be? That testing has been around for quite some time. And they try, again, give us very kind of quantitative numbers, but it's a little subjective. And
probably, I would assume it's kind of similar to David Bakhtiari, progressing well. But let's actually see it on the field when the games count.
Yeah, as always.
Hey, I wanted to ask you about this again here too. This was from an interview a couple weeks ago. But I was a big Penny Hardaway fan as a kid. I was a huge Penny Hardaway fan, and we know injuries kind of derailed his career there. He had a quote in an interview that he did on a podcast that said his decision to have microfracture surgery on his knee was, quote, the worst decision I've ever made. And apparently that procedure is no longer practiced by doctors. Can you give us a little bit of a background on what a microfracture surgery is?
So microfracture is definitely still done every day around the country, so that's not true. So let's take a step back. What is microfracture? So before you answer that question, you have to ask, what are you doing it for? So this is back to cartilage defects. So when a patient has an injury to an area of cartilage, if it's relatively small and relatively focal, meaning it's a small little spot as opposed to like the whole entire joint kind of falling apart, you can go down, you scrape away what little cartilage remains. You want a nice even edge, we call it a shoulder, and then you can actually poke little holes in the bone. Inside the bone, you have bone marrow, and there's stem cells that'll come back and fill that with a clot. You have the patient do physical therapy, moving the leg. The cells in that clot feel friction and motion, so it turns into a cartilage-like scar. So it's not real cartilage, but it's like we call it fibrocartilage. So it's similar to cartilage, so it fills in the pothole. That's basically the idea behind a microfracture. And we know that microfracture is not as good as some of the more advanced other techniques. The issue lies in several things. One, insurance companies. So often they won't pay for the more advanced ones without attempting a microfracture first. So they'll say, well, has it failed a microfracture? And it also has to do with like the size of the lesion. So if they're relatively small, microfracture actually can work. Studies have shown for less than a square centimeter lesion that can work actually reasonably well. Now, if you get bigger or you have bony involvement, then you have to start talking about different procedures where we take like a core plug of bone and cartilage or a Macy procedure, things like that. So the Penny Hardaway really should have said, the biggest regret in my career was getting a cartilage injury, because that is what undid him. The surgeon was trying to address the fact he had cartilage damage. So we don't microfracture healthy tissue. So it's not like you go into a knee and say, let's microfracture this condyle and see what happens. I mean, you do it because there's already a defect in the cartilage. So he was unhappy with the results. And if it was a bigger lesion, or even if it's smaller, it just didn't work. Yeah, I mean, it does not have a 100% success rate. And so whenever I counsel a patient that we're talking about doing microfracture, we always say, look, this may heal. It may heal well, but even if it does, it doesn't necessarily last for a long time. And when it doesn't heal well, you're basically back to where you were before. Now, in the current day and age of medicine, we have newer techniques where when Penny was playing, it was really, that was kind of it. You had your microfracture. There wasn't cartilage grafting. There wasn't allograft plugs. There wasn't autograft plugs. So the options are certainly more numerous for the athletes now, which is great. But, again, and it is, I'm sure we all remember him playing, and I mean, when he played, he was elite. I mean, he was one of my favorite players as a kid as well. And to see a career cut short with that, it's always tragic. But it's really the cartilage injury that began it. They tried to treat it, it didn't work, and obviously that was the end of his career.
And I know he mentioned here too, like he wished he didn't have that, but kind of what you were alluding to there as well. Like, what other options would he have had if it wasn't microfracture? I mean, to not play anymore and not have a surgery at that point.
Exactly, that's the whole point. Is that it was the surgeon's I'm sure was like, you have a full thickness cartilage defect. It's this or nothing. Clearly, it wasn't doing well without it. Otherwise, you wouldn't do the procedure. So, I mean, again, I don't know every detail, but that certainly is obvious reading between the lines. So, yeah, it is. We've come a long way. I mean, we've come a long way in how we treat cartilage lesions. So we have made great strides. Are we to the point where we see cartilage injury and say, hell, no worries, we got this taken care of? Absolutely not. I mean, it's still, when you see a young athlete who tears their ACL and on the MRI you see a defect in the cartilage, it's always okay, here we go. We got to try to address this problem. And it's a big problem. So, I hope someday we're going to have the ability to do like a simple stem cell injection there and grow completely new, brand new, completely intact cartilage. We are not there yet. But someday there's going to be techniques that'll surpass what we're doing now. And I'm not kidding you, millions and billions of dollars in research going into that exact topic. So we'll get there someday. We're just not there now.
Yeah, interesting. Hey, before I let you go, you mentioned ACL, and I just thought of this too. So there was a Packer player, Kingsley Enagbare. He got hurt, I think it was in the Dallas playoff game, and he said that he tore his ACL, and everybody just assumed he tore his ACL. He didn't play in the game against the 49ers and such. Dude's practicing. And he's practicing without a brace or anything like that. So apparently he didn't tear his ACL. What do you think could have potentially happened where, at one point everybody assumed he tore his ACL. He told the media that he tore his ACL, but apparently he didn't. So, I mean, was it just maybe a stretch, a strain, possibly? Or?
Yeah. I mean, it's possibly he probably had or potentially had a partial tear. And they treated it with a brace and PT, and it healed up well enough. And if he's practicing, obviously he's doing okay. So my assumption is a partial tear. And so, any sprain, and we've talked about this a number of times, is, there's different grades of sprains, grade 3 being complete. So, most of the time once the ACL starts to go, it goes completely. So partial tears are not super common. But they do happen, and so you can treat those conservatively. Some ligaments do very well even with a high-grade partial. So PCLs and MCLs, we're often able to brace those. Unfortunately for the ACL, though, usually once it goes, it goes. And then you're looking at doing a reconstruction to address that. So for him, luckily, it sounds like it was a partial, and likely did not have any other associated injuries, so meniscal or cartilage-based. So he's able to get back after rehabbing it, and that's always awesome to see if you can avoid surgery. Because, surgery, a lot of them work very well, but it's always better to avoid it if you can.
Are you getting nervous about the JJ rumors and all that?
Oh, man, it's yes and no. I mean, I think there's always going to be that chatter, and, hopefully the coaching staff is trying to kind of put him in his place and, got to earn your stripes and that stuff. But I have to admit, he wasn't my top choice coming into the draft, but he's going to have whoever is leading the helm is going to have a lot of weapons at their disposal, and hopefully that can propel. I mean, there's plenty of guys that came relatively unheralded from college into the NFL and excelled, so, there's no reason he can't be one of them. But, yeah, it does give you pause, no doubt about that.
He's Dr. Crow, inside the training room, Chippewa Valley Orthopedics and Sports Medicine. Dude, appreciate it as always, man. Enjoy your weekend, and let's catch up again next week, okay, bud?
Yep, absolutely. Take care.
You got it. Dr. Crow, inside the training room. Good stuff as always. Love chatting with Dr. Crow every Friday morning.